Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a play that I read from a classic author. This play is about Roman rulers and betrayal. I am referring to Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, and that was published in 1599 thereabouts. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling that, a lot of people know who Julius Caesar is. I've talked about him on this channel before, so I'll be brief. But he was a writer and poet who wrote a lot of poetry in the early part of his career, owing in part to the fact that he couldn't get his plays published during the time of plague in London. But then after the plague had ended, he went back to showing off his plays. Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Richard III, The Love Labour's Lost, and Julius Caesar, among many others. He's a well-renowned poet and writer. Some people have said that he didn't write many of his own plays, but those people are probably wrong. And so, there doesn't need to be anything else really said about Shakespeare. I feel like I'm not doing justice in this biography of him. But anyways, I checked out this book from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. What is interesting on this is it's from the Shakespeare on the Double collection. Which has like the writing of Shakespeare on the left side of the page and the translation on the right hand side, which I didn't rely on too much because, as I'll say later in the video, this is some pretty accessible writing from Shakespeare. A lot of his other plays have just been complete nonsense at times, where he just launches into a tirade about fairies or gets deep in metaphor or allegory. And with like Romeo and Juliet and Julius Caesar, not so much. It's pretty understandable what he's trying to say. This is a pretty cool edition if you want to check it out, but there are probably lots of other editions that have better introductions or something like that. Be sure to check out one of those. And so without further ado, let's talk about Julius Caesar. I will do a brief summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Julius Caesar focuses on not just Julius Caesar, as it turns out. He's really a side character in this story, but it takes place during the 1st century BC in Rome. And the first scene deals with two characters, Flavius and Marcellus, walking through the streets, chastising the people of Rome for celebrating Caesar's return after having won the Civil War. And they're chastising these people because they seem to be happy with Caesar, telling them that they seemingly have forgotten about Pompey and that Caesar pales in comparison with other leaders. It then focuses on Caesar and his group of people. A soothsayer comes up to Caesar and says, "Beware the Ides of March," the classic phrase, telling him that something bad is going to happen on March 15th, although Caesar dismisses this person, which is, foolish at the time, but, if nothing would have happened on March 15th, he would have looked very smart there. And while he's having a conversation with someone else, Cassius and Brutus, one of his friends, are having a conversation where Cassius reveals that he doesn't really like Caesar because he's starting to behave a lot like a king, and Rome doesn't need any more tyrant rulers. Brutus tries to argue for Caesar, but Cassius quickly convinces him of how Caesar needs to go, and they begin plotting Caesar's downfall. And Cassius talks in a way which suggests that he might be manipulating Brutus, although it seems like what happens later in the play that he's actually a true believer of all that he is telling Brutus. The plotters think about killing Mark Antony, but they consider that they can possibly persuade him after they do the killing to their side, because it's no small thing. And while this is happening, Caesar begins seeing more omens, and his wife Calpurnia tells him that he should stay home on March 15th because she's not really sure what's going to happen on that day. And when Caesar gets to the Senate pleads for him to allow a man named Cimber to return back to Rome, whereas Caesar had banished him before. And Caesar straight up tells Cassius that all Cassius is easily swayed by pleas and whatnot. Caesar is steadfast in his commitment towards his decisions, and so he will not let Cimber return. And although he doesn't kill Caesar because of that sick insult that he lobbed at him, they still all stab Caesar, and Caesar dies last by being stabbed by Brutus, and he says, "Et tu, Brute, like you too, Brute, my own friend has killed me." The Senate group is confronted by Mark Antony, who is initially mad, although he's calmed down by this group, who assert that they will tell him why they did it at Caesar's funeral. And although it seems like Mark Antony is being complacent, it really seems like he is trying to bring in Octavius Caesar as a way of controlling this initial civil war that is going to affect Rome. And then when at the funeral, there's a bunch of funeral speeches. Brutus talks about how Caesar was becoming a king and he needed to be brought down before he could bring ruin to Rome. And then Mark Antony gets up and does his speech, his friend's Roman countryman speech, which is excellent, by the way, one of the best speeches I've read in really any literature ever, which is saying something. And Antony is saying that, if Caesar only wanted good for Rome, and all we have to do is rely on the honor, quote unquote, of Brutus and his friends, who don't quite seem so honorable given everything we know about Caesar. And at this point, the crowd turns on the assassins, and they even try to kill people as Brutus and Cassius flee Rome, and Octavius enters Rome, thus starting the civil war there. Cassius and Brutus argue on the plains of Philippi about what happened, blaming each other for the start of the civil war. And while Brutus is alone, he is visited by Caesar's ghost, who delivers upon him another omen of things to come. As the play ends, the Battle of Philippi takes place, which results in the death of Cassius, who ends up killing himself, or he has himself killed by one of his servants, who he frees after the end. And Brutus dies also being killed by one of his servants running him through his own sword. And it appears that Octavius has claimed victory in this initial part of the Civil War. And as the play ends, Mark Antony praises Brutus, saying that ultimately he only had Rome's best interest in mind, thus showing how we sort of retcon characters or retcon people when we want to remember them after their deaths. In terms of analysis, there is a bit to talk about with this play. This is a Shakespeare play, and I do feel that you could run this back line by line by line. Something I just mentioned at the end of the play is retconning someone's death after they've sort of passed, remembering them in a different way. And it's interesting that Antony, spends Brutus's life after he dies, portrays him in a slightly better way of thinking. And it's because he clearly didn't think that way about Brutus during his life, given that he had just killed a man that he loved. But we see that again happen with Mark Antony as after Caesar dies, with Mark Antony saying, "Oh, Caesar was a great man. He wasn't becoming a tyrant at all. He had Rome's only their best interest in mind." So that makes me wonder: was Mark Antony lying the whole time? Was this because this whole play seems to be about power and people who try to claim more or something like that? A little bit about that, and that might be what's happening here with Mark Antony. Again, you can pick this apart line by line, and you might discover a lot about this play. So something to consider as you're going forth with this play. But another thing that Shakespeare talks about in this play, or touches upon, is the idea of omens. So you have a whole bunch of signs coming that Caesar is going to die. Not necessarily foreshadowing in the same light as Romeo and Juliet, more so just people coming up and saying, hey, things aren't looking good for you, Caesar. A soothsayer shows up. It says the classic line, beware the Ides of March. Calpurnia, too, is a little hesitant to let Caesar out of her sight because of some bad dreams and other things that are happening. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Alas, my lord, your wisdom is consumed in confidence. Do not go forth today. Call it my fear that keeps you in the house and not your own. We'll send Mark Antony to the Senate house, and he shall say you are not well today. Let me upon my knee prevail in this. And there you have Calpurnia saying, I saw bad things that are going to happen to you. Send Mark Antony in your place, and, you can go to the Senate another day. And who knows, maybe the plotters would have given up on their plan if it had been like fate had revealed to, not send Caesar to the Senate that day. But unfortunately, he did go to the Senate that day. And so the omens were proved right ultimately. And another omen that happens is after Caesar dies, when Brutus is on the battle at Philippi, and he's all alone. He sees Caesar's ghost, who says something bad is going to happen tomorrow during the battle, and it really worries Brutus, who's already feeling a lot of guilt, and so that's another omen in this play. And so you really see Shakespeare blending the mystical with the historical, that fate is aligning to make these historical events happen, that maybe these are probably destined to happen or something like that. You could also see this as a bit of irony, because if you knew your history, which maybe not a lot of people in 16th century England did, but if you knew your history, you would know oh, that's going to happen. That's definitely irony, whereas the characters don't really know that that's going to happen. Another interesting element of the story is that of Cassius. I think all of the characters are really interestingly written, especially Caesar, because he seems like a side character in this story that is written about him. Imagine if Romeo and Juliet were written from the perspective of Benvolio and Mercutio and Tybalt. Imagine that story. That would be interesting. But I think that's what's happening here in Caesar, where the story is partially, I would say, told from Cassius's perspective. And this is a man who seems to be driven by fear and jealousy. He does not like Shakespeare for a very specific reason. Allow me to read you another quote from this. A wretched creature and must bend his body. If Caesar carelessly, but not on him, he had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. His coward lips from did their color fly, and that same eye whose bend doth awe the world did lose his luster. I did hear him groan, aye, and that tongue of that bade the Romans mark him and write his speeches in their books. Alas, it cried, give me some drink, Tinius. As a sick girl, ye gods, it doth amaze me. A man of such a feeble temper should so get the start of the majestic world and bear the palm alone. And right there, you really get at Cassius's anger towards Caesar, describing times where he's seen Caesar be weak, and maybe to some degree he's very frustrated with the fact that people view Caesar as some sort of god when he's just a normal man. And a little bit of jealousy too. Why should this man who I've supported in the past get so much when I might be better than him, a better fit to lead the country? Cassius doesn't really seem to indicate that he would be the one to lead the country after Caesar's death, but that doesn't seem hard to believe. And he does seem to be manipulating Brutus. At one point in the story, he says, like, Brutus is so easily swayed. After he has a conversation with Brutus, it seems to be like he can sway his honor in one way or another. Something that really sounds like he's trying to manipulate Brutus to his cause because he's evil at heart or something like that. Or the alternative is that he is a true believer. Like, he truly believes that Caesar is becoming a tyrant. And as a result, he's trying to persuade everyone he can. And so when he says, like, oh, I can sway Brutus, like, he's saying, I can persuade people to see that this man is bad, is not good for this country, is going to lead Rome to destruction. And so I do have to wonder, is Cassius written here to be a hero? And is Caesar supposed to be the villain? Is it left up to the reader, to the person in the play, to decide those things? It really seems like Shakespeare wants to write Cassius as the hero. But as I'll note later, like, that, it kind of falls apart when you see it like that, because we don't get this. We don't hear much from Caesar, so we don't really know if he's actually a tyrant or if this is just his delusion and his frustrations building up and leading him to see what maybe might not be there. Another interesting thing about this story is how Shakespeare writes about unintended consequences. These schemers, these plotters, do not consider the consequences of Caesar's death. They see him becoming a tyrant, and that's pretty much all they see. They're like, that's bad. We got to end this person before they do any harm. And, that seems very noble. But when you kill someone, especially someone with so high power, like with so much power, like that's going to leave a big mark, and it's not going to be easy to clean up this mess. Because Caesar's death clearly affects Mark Antony, who is so filled with rage, who is so frustrated and doesn't like the answer that Cassius and Brutus seem to provide, that he just calls upon Octavius. And even if Mark Antony hadn't done that, Octavius still would have shown up. He's a Caesar. I'm sure he was next in line to the throne. So killing that person and trying to grab power in a civil war is only going to lead to more harm. And then the ultimate effect of all of this is a civil war. Rome had just gone through a civil war between Caesar and Pompey. And now it's going through another one. So these people love Rome, but clearly not enough to prevent another lengthy war that's going to hurt a lot of people. And I think that's really fascinating about this play, is that not a lot of people consider the consequences. Really, the only person who considers it is Mark Antony. Like, right after the death, he says that classic line, like, "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war," which is an amazingly badass line, I'll say. But it's essentially like this death that they did, like, has these consequences of yet another civil war, of more strife in Rome. And I like how Shakespeare gets at that, because especially in England at the time, where there were these constant wars and constant plots against various rulers, like, those people didn't really think about the consequences, and maybe all they thought about was the power. And in that thinking, this is what happens. It leads to more war and more death. And the answer to, how do you stop how do you stop bad people from getting power is clearly not more murder or something like that. There's other elements of this play that are really good. The funeral scene, especially when you have Brutus talking and then Mark Antony talking, and the amount of passion and emotion that he displays, that Shakespeare writes, is just fantastic. It really highlights why William Shakespeare is considered one of the best writers, best English writers at least, is because of the emotion that he's able to infuse in this story. And so I think the funeral scene alone is probably worth the price of admission. It's worth reading this book. I also think this is one of the most accessible Shakespeare plays, at least that I've read so far. Because as I was reading it, like Shakespeare tends to just get sidetracked by fairies and allegories and metaphors. And here he pretty much sticks straight to just straight talk, like telling you exactly what he's saying without getting sidetracked. And in that way, I do think it's a very accessible, very easy to read play. But there are a few flaws that I feel hold this back slightly. One is the idea of Brutus and Caesar's friendship. We're told that Brutus and Caesar are great friends, but we're never shown that. We're just simply told, like, oh, hey, these people are great friends. But Brutus and Caesar never really interact. And if they do interact, it's never in a way that suggests that they've been friends. So when Brutus kills Caesar, okay, what is that supposed to mean? Like it doesn't really have an emotional impact because we've never seen the extent of their friendship. And so maybe this play could have done a little bit more. Like instead of having the Civil War section, it could have done a little bit of lead up, a little bit more lead up into the end, and made it have a little bit more of an impact. And that related to that is that the idea of Caesar as a tyrant, because we're also told that Caesar's been acting like a tyrant, but we really only see one example of that happening, and that's when Caesar tries on the crown, or not tries it on, but Mark Antony offers it to him 3 times, and 3 times Caesar says no. And based on that one example, like there's no real evidence that Caesar is trying to be a tyrant, trying to be a king. Like historically, we have him dressing in purple robes or something like that, which might be an indicator that he wants to be emperor. But that doesn't happen in this play. So if we base it on history, we might see something, but if it doesn't happen in this play, is it really real? So I don't really buy that Caesar is trying to become a tyrant, and that's the reason they murder him. And because of that, it's really hard to see Cassius as a good guy if that's how Shakespeare is trying to portray him, because in the end he's deluded himself into believing that Shakespeare might be a king. If anything, he's like a tragic like villain, and that the murder that he does only leads to further harm and does exactly what he was hoping to prevent down the road. Anyway, those were my thoughts on Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, a high-quality play. Despite the flaws that I noted, I ultimately still really love this, and I'm going to recommend it to you if you haven't read it already. Like, if you're watching this because you read a Shakespeare play in the past, you probably read Julius Caesar. I don't think it's taught like Romeo and Juliet is in high school, but I do think that if you've taken a college English course on Shakespeare especially, you've probably read Julius Caesar. And it's well worth reading because of the ideas that Shakespeare presents as it relates to like the unintended consequences and how he writes Cassius in general of like this person who is just jealous and angry and really frustrated with Caesar. It's really good. So yeah, I'm going to recommend it to you out there. If you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I've said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Julius Caesar. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this if they haven't already read it, and William Shakespeare if they don't know who that is. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird travels. Try not to kill your friends.